Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the organizing committee for setting this up. As Dietmar Till was saying yesterday, making a conference is a lot of work. And I think those of us who have just arrived here and participated in yesterday can see that everything is running smoothly and extremely professionally, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to meet. Being in Poland is a particular joy for me. This is in fact the third Rhetoric conference that I'm attending in the city of Warsaw, and the fourth communication conference that I'm attending in Poland. I think that speaks to the significant leadership role that Polish rhetoricians are taking in our field scene on a European plane, and I just want to applaud you for that. There was a time when rhetoric studies were scarce and very small in Europe, where it was bigger in the States, more systematized, and I think Poland is really taking a leadership role in changing that and helping us all develop a stronger European community. Of course, the Rhetoric Society of Europe is one part of that, but an event like this is also one. And on that note, I just want to thank you for your hospitality. I know this is the Polish Rhetoric Society, and here we are, people from other countries just barging in, and you're very nice to us, and allowing us to speak English. And I want to also acknowledge that. What I'm going to talk about today is in some ways one answer to the question that Petra asked us yesterday. What would we do if we, what do we need in order to build a society? What do we need to maintain a society that's safe and constructive for everyone? This is a work that started a long time ago. But I hope to show you that it has a life, and maybe it will also have some relevance for your work. We'll see when we come to the discussion part. So I know this title doesn't win any sexy awards. I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to talk about almost every single word in it. I just want to make absolutely clear that I think of this topic as relevant to this conference theme, in the sense that I think rhetorical citizenship is useful in connection with education to and innovation of, participation in, and also evaluation of discursive participation and co-creation in democratic society. And along the way, I'll try to kind of point more specifically to where I see the pedagogical relevance and the more evaluative one in particular. As you were saying, this work has been coming out in various ways. There are two books, and what I'll talk about today is primarily in this article listed in the middle. So that's a hack. Read that and you'll kind of know what it's about. So this is what I'll talk about. I have a few more introductory remarks. I want to start out actually by illustrating what we're talking about. So I want to start with illustrations rather than the theoretical background, and then I'll come to that later by means of a little bit of an historical overview, a little bit about the concepts rhetorical resources, and then we come to a more graphic representation of our thinking about that. And then finally, discussions and questions. And I say we, because the person here is my colleague Christian Koch, with whom this work, I developed this work. So it's very much a collaboration. He might as well have been standing here. It happens to be me. Everything we did together. So yeah, what is that? I have a few comments that might situate how we approach this. We think of rhetoric as something that's functional. It's action-oriented. We think of it as normatively informed. So That's a set of norms that would value empowerment, inclusivity, responsiveness, etc. We're also primarily interested in authentic discourse. So what is actually being said. I have a background. I spoke with a colleague this morning about the rhetoric of literature, and that's kind of where I started. I think that's a fantastic, fascinating area. It's not really within this realm. And finally, we think of this as something that might supplement, it might sustain theoretical accounts of a societal discourse on a micro level as well as a more macro level. As you will see me saying a couple of times, you could say we're actually setting the bar really low. We're trying to articulate ways that rhetoric might help us in keeping a conversation going. We're not trying to achieve consensus necessarily. We're trying to prevent people from stopping to talk with each other, because we see a risk of that. People are tuning out of public discourse. People are feeling alienated by public discourse. I think rhetoric has a central role in trying to push back on that and say it still matters, it's still important, and you are still important. There are a couple of things I have learned about this concept over the years since we first started working with it. So let me also mention those. First of all, the word itself, rhetorical citizenship, is English. We translated it from Danish. And I've come over time to realize that, as with any translation, it doesn't travel completely seamlessly. And yeah, I'm a little clumsy. So the word medborgerskab, the MED means together or with. So it's a word that's trying to signal a togetherness. We don't have a grammatical category in Danish to say that. No, in Greek there is such a grammatical construct. We don't have it, so we have to construct a word. The problem is we can't have that. We can't say co-citizenship in English. It sounds a little awkward. And the problem is that when we talk about citizenship in English, it sounds as if we're really thinking about the legal aspect of being a recognized citizen of a state. And that's not really what we're talking about. You could be a refugee and perform rhetorical citizenship, even if you don't have a legal status. But that kind of disappears in the translation. So that's one thing. And the other is that our way of thinking about that, of course, grew out of our context, which is a Scandinavian welfare state, relatively politically stable, with a particular democratic tradition. And I'm completely aware that some of the things that may be taken for granted in Denmark or in Scandinavia as such cannot be taken for granted elsewhere. So again, this is an idea, it's something that might be helpful, and it's something that will have to be molded to the particular context in which it is taken up. Right. So I said I would start with some examples. There'll be 2.5 examples. We'll go back to 2015. This white blot here is Denmark. We've got Germany here, Poland is here, Sweden is here. And some of you probably remember the events in the fall, late summer of 2015, when there was this influx of refugees coming up through Europe. And they also arrived in Denmark, most of them by boat, and came here or here. And with no money, what were they to do but to start walking? Now, we're not used to people walking in the motorways in Denmark, and police and politicians were completely taken aback. They had no idea what to do. So there's a police car here kind of watching what's going on and trying to block traffic. But they were walking, most of them heading towards Copenhagen, which is here, not to stay in Denmark, but actually to move on to Sweden. That's what most of them were doing. That was the political background. So it was talked of as a stream of refugees, and it was significant. In Denmark, this was about a 4-time increase of the regular amount of refugees coming in 1 year. This was the person who was the minister of that area at the time. She had just recently been elected. She comes from at that time she came from a moderate right-wing party, I would say, and her platform was to reduce the number of refugees as effectively as possible. And she did this with various initiatives, reducing the monthly stipend, doubling the time you'd have to wait to have your family join you, seizing of personal valuables. So if you arrived as a refugee and had money or jewelry on you, the police was authorized to take that. This caused a significant amount of discussion, interesting in itself. But my focus will be on this particular initiative. She contrived the idea of placing an ad in Middle Eastern papers notifying potential refugees of these restrictions, under the logic that if they knew how terrible it would be to come to Denmark, they probably, would decide not to flee war. And this is what the advertisement looked like. It's detailing the various initiatives. And you might have noticed there was this handwritten note on top. See, what happened was that a group of Danish citizens were very much in a disagreement with the initiatives of the political elite there. So they collected money, and then they decided to run the advertisements, but with this sort of handwritten note on it, saying a statement from people to people: sorry for the hostility towards refugees expressed here. As ordinary Danes, we wish to extend our sympathy and compassion to anyone fleeing war and despair. And then hashtag people reaching out. Hashtags were really hot at the time. It was right after the Orange Revolution, where Twitter had first kind of gotten some attention, and this was really, really interesting, really up to date. I want to also point to the heart there. This is just around the time Facebook was introducing these other emojis and not just the thumbs up. So they're really happening here. But the things I want to emphasize here is that we've got what you might call a bottom-up rhetorical citizenship. Citizens are saying what the Danish state is doing does not represent us. We need to express that. We're kind of signaling this to the rest of the world. They're taking on what they think would be a more proper, correct, and ethical form of citizenship, and they're enacting. So they're doing it. They're also doing it in a way that does not cancel out the voice that they're opposing, right? They're putting it at the top and at the bottom, so they're not canceling the government's message the way they felt that they had been kind of canceled or overruled by the politicians. So that's all I want to say about this right now, but an example of someone taking on a discursive action to say, this is not who we are, we want to do something else, we're talking differently. At the end of 2015 came 2016, and there's a tradition in Denmark that the Prime Minister gives a speech on the first day of the new year. That was our Prime Minister then. I also want to point to what he said, not in connection with the case I just mentioned, but because I think that could serve as an example of what you might call top-down rhetorical citizenship. So he is talking about the public conversation in this speech. He says, we need a better conversation with each other where we listen, perhaps particularly to those with whom we disagree, where we acknowledge that a matter has more than one side, and I would like to contribute to that. He continues, because if we lose the ability to talk together across society, we lose something very Danish. I don't know why that's particularly Danish, but let's just have that on him. Indeed, to be a bit lofty, then we lose what is special about our democracy: equality between people, respect for other people's opinions, decency, the broad collaboration Denmark is built on. That must not happen. We need to speak openly and honestly about the problems, to listen to each other and find common solutions, because only through the ability to speak together and collaborate can we take care of Denmark together. And I think that's all he said. I would say that that's an interesting example of the top political leader in a country saying there's something awry with the way we are talking our democracy. And he's in some ways trying to craft a more constructive way of speaking. It's clearly normatively based. He's saying, you know, listening, understanding, accepting the disagreement, and still being decent to each other is something that we should value. You don't see prime ministers saying this sort of thing very often, so I think it's worth pointing to. In the same speech, actually on the heels of the same speech, he did a Facebook video, which looked like this. You might see that he's kind of turned. Before you were seeing him straight, now he's turning to Facebook. So they did a little movie where he's saying the same things that he was in the speech, but then he breaks from that manuscript and says, hello out there on Facebook. You see that he's doing that. And what he's doing there is commenting on comments on Facebook and saying one of the places that we have public discourse is on social media. At this time it was primarily Facebook. And he says, Happy New Year to all here on Facebook. I did an alternative version of my New Year's speech, just a little encouragement to behave. In Danish, it's keep the tone in the political debate. I look forward to many hours with all of you here on Facebook in 2016. And then he does kind of a spin of, I think his name is Jimmy Kimmel, who does this reading of mean messages online. The one that's on the screen here says, damn, you ugly, Lars. But he reads a number of them. In other words, using himself as an example of someone who receives a lot of really aggressive messages. Of course, there's much to be said about the level of hate that a white male politician gets compared to other public figures. But at least it's a signal, or it's a way of saying, you know, I get this, and it's not helping. Right. So that was bottom up, top down, and then kind of a small extra example of what we think we could talk about as rhetorical citizenship. So now I want to say a little bit about where we're coming from, the disciplinary background of the concept. And to us, rhetoric is many things. Its actuality, its significance to contemporary society is very much rooted in the field's connection to the democratic ideals and practice. And we read Aristotle as beginning that, saying that linking rhetoric with statecraft. You know, if we want to do a state, we need to secure rhetorical abilities. Cicero talks about how rhetoric, of course, enables humans to build civilizations and shape laws and civic rights. More contemporarily, Jerry Hauser, who has done quite a bit of work. I like this quote very much. He says, "Free societies require rhetorically competent citizens." So just shout out to the education part of the conference. The competence is important. Without rhetorical competence, citizens are disabled in the public arenas of citizen exchange. The marketplace, the representative assembly, the court, and the public institutions, and democracy turns into a ruse disguising the reality of oligarchic power. What's not part of this quote is that he's contrasting these various fora, the marketplace, the representative assembly, with the kind of address that we get most often, namely addresses as consumers. We are constantly met with advertisements placing us as people who can spend money. And that is the role that is most visible for us in the public sphere. He's pointing to other roles that we might take upon us. And finally, Brian Garston, who's an American philosopher, political theory, has taken up an interest in rhetoric in recent years, and he has this very nice formulation saying, rhetorical deliberation brings to politics what he calls a certain attentiveness to others. To influence the judgment of another person, as rhetoric aims to do, one must pay attention to his or her particular commitments, sentiments, and tastes. What he's trying to get at here is that political life is more than just interest groups, that we are not defined by what you might say quantitative facts of socioeconomic position, that there are other ways in which we might be attuned. So to appeal to people just let's say, if we're talking in terms of taxes, we hear all the time politicians appealing to some people saying, wouldn't it be nice to pay less taxes? And he's saying, well, some people actually want to do something that's not in their particular individual interest, but he's trying to formulate a basis for talking about a more common good, speaking to people not as individual consumers, but as parts of a civic unity. So our theoretical roots and allies in thinking about this, we're pulling together thoughts that we have found very inspirational, and here are some of them. In fact, this is what I'll be coming to in a minute. What I want to say with this slide is that when Christian and I were collaborating, we were kind of coming from two different sides. My interest at the time was very much on the concept of rhetorical agency, a concept that that emerged right around the year 2K, when all weird things happened. The field of rhetoric as such was at a point where the question was, how do we consolidate all the things we've learned from post-structuralism about how we are not autonomous, self-involved subjects that have complete control. We're enmeshed in various kinds of socioeconomic and power relations. So this modernist idea of the rhetor who just gets up, has an idea, persuades the harmless audience. There was a clash there, and rhetorical agency was a way to try and think about what can rhetoric do? If where are we? Can we teach people rhetoric if really it's all socioeconomic? Where's the individual? I was interested in that, and I was interested in it because I'll come to that, but there were voices at the time saying, we've been listening to particular voices, but if we use the term rhetorical agency, that might help us, in fact, notice other kinds of participants in the public sphere and kind of grow bigger ears, hear other types or see other types of participation as, in fact, civically relevant and valuable. That was what I was, where I was coming from, and Christian Koch was coming more from the field of argumentation theory and ideas about deliberative democracy. So what he was trying to do was saying, well, you know, let's take some of these, of what we know about rhetorical argumentation, let's take some of the norms that we get from deliberative democracy so that we can formulate a framework where we could qualify what we're saying. Is this actually a constructive form of public discourse, or is it not? I'll get more into that in a moment. Another favorite quote is from Hauser and Benoit Barnet. Public opinion is more than a nose count and more than the expressed views of its leaders. It is the civil judgment we reach through the convergence of formal and vernacular interactions dispersed across society, occurring in different media, and emanating from voices representative of different viewpoints. And they continue, civil society redirects our attention to the language of social dialogue on which our understanding of political interest and possibilities rests. Hauser has written a lot about vernacular rhetoric. I'll get back to that in a second. But I love the first part, that it's not just a nose count. When we hear public opinion polls, that is what he's up against. And he's saying opinion polls render a very one-dimensional and in some ways impoverished understanding of what's going on in civic society. He has a whole chapter on how much he hates public opinion polls. But one of the things that he says about that is that when you are polled, you are responding in isolation. You're asked on a scale from 1 to 5, what do you think of this? Or, you know, how would you vote tomorrow? What do you think of the climate crisis? Or what do you think about fracking? Or, and the problem with that is some people just respond because then, you know, they're nice people and they say, oh, someone wants my opinion, I'll give them an opinion. And maybe it's you end up on a 3 because you're not really sure. You don't really know what the issues are. And yeah, so it's just a 3. Or you may say something else. Hauser's point is, wouldn't it be cool if we actually were able to discuss these questions with someone and say, what do you know about this? What are some views? But this sort of just gun to your head, what do you think about this, does not give very detailed or thoughtful answers. So he's saying, you know, let's try and have some vernacular interactions. Let's try and talk about these things more. And direct our attention to social dialogue. Robert Ivy, our mutual friend and mentor, I think has contributed constructively also to this discussion. He has this one article published in 2002. In fact, he's reiterated the ideas in several publications, but this one I think is nice. He says we need to look to rhetoric to better public discussion. He sees rhetoric as a resource for reconceiving a political argumentation, not to postpone it to ideal situations, but to deal with the fact of disagreement. So what this postponement idea is that, oh, you know, there's realpolitik, the day-to-day life, and, you know, accept that it's just power and forget about politics. And he's saying, you know, that's not necessarily the case. We need to have rhetoric as part of that. Let me continue. So he's saying the dual challenge of public deliberation is to communicate politically without an exclusionary aim for consensus and unity or reduction to difference to total otherness. He's writing this, as you can see, right after 9/11, at a point where American public discourse was also at that time very much divided, so that either you were with George Bush or you were with the terrorists. And he's in this article, he's showing how any initiative to just question, how do we get on from here? Why might this have happened to us? Did we do something that brought this onto us? Was written away as disloyal to the nation. So that's either the consensus or you're, a traitor. So he's saying rhetoric would be a way to look to public discussion and actually just accept that we have to work with dissent, that we will not be in agreement about things. We have to learn to be in disagreement, and he embraces the notion forwarded by Chantal Mouffe about the agonistic approach rather than the antagonistic. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, but just briefly, the agonistic would be one where you kind of accept the terms of disagreement with the sense that, similar to a sports game. If you don't go in there to win, it's going to be a boring game. But you're playing by the rules of the game. You're not trying to necessarily wipe the others off the face of the earth, as an antagonist would be to completely defeat. So he's saying there's a strong tradition in rhetoric of being with this agonistic approach of saying, someone has to argue for something and someone has to argue against, and we don't need to vilify those who are on the opposite side than ourselves. John Dreisack is a philosopher. We heard his name mentioned yesterday also. He comes from Australia. He published in 2019 an article with, I think, 40 other social scientists reporting on a lot of studies about civic involvement. Here are some of the key conclusions. He's saying that if we want to have any chance of breaking the vicious cycle of uncivil behavior by elites and pathological mass communication, ordinary citizens need to be involved. Political advisors need to understand that it's turning voters off when they are upping the stakes all the time. And they're saying ordinary people are capable of high quality deliberation, especially when deliberative processes are well arranged, when they include the provision of balanced information, expert testimony, and oversight of a facilitator. And he's saying, or they are saying rather, that deliberation promotes considered judgment and counteracts populism. And they finally say a major improvement to the deliberative system would involve enhancing moments and sites of listening and reflection and integrating these into political processes that are currently overwhelmed by a surfeit of expression. So all in all these studies that they are reporting on are experiments in doing citizen forums, various types of involvement, and the result is that citizens around the world feel a greater commitment and are more happier with the solutions that come out of these projects. Does it all have to be in the form of words or written text? Not necessarily. We are all beholden to Kenneth Burke for talking about rhetoric as symbolic action. So a pussy hat might be a way of signaling that you are there, that you do not agree with President Trump's view of women, or in fact condone his political program as such. And some of the key sources here would be Hauser's vernacular rhetoric. He was among the first to say, let's focus more on citizens' everyday discourse rather than just the discourse of elites. Robert Asen talked about a theory of citizenship as being discursively based, so it's a very close connection to our thinking and his. And Brouwer and Asen talked about various kinds of modalities. Local example, the I'm not sure if it has a name in itself, this graffito in Polish, but for those non-Polish in the audience, you've got the P for Poland and you've got the W for Warsaw, and sometimes you have the 1944 as a reminder of the time during the end of the Second World War, where there was an uprising in Warsaw, and the hope was that the Russians would come to the aid of the citizens, and they didn't. They just stayed and watched the Germans punish the city. Western states also delayed in coming to the aid of Warsaw, so the city was destroyed. And since then, during the Russian occupation of the country, this was a graffito to signal opposition and unity. And Jerry Hauser has written about this particular graffito on multiple occasions as a way to talk about citizens getting together and expressing a sense of identity that is based in perhaps the Catholic faith. This could be an anchor, which is also a Christian symbol, or more in terms of national independence. How am I doing for time?
You're doing well.
All right. I'll regret that. Is that you could think about rhetorical citizenship as something that is active. You're talking, you're writing, you're memeing, whatever you are, or as more on the receiving side. And the word passive is not here, which normally we would say is the opposite of active. I'm saying actively receiving. And I get back to why it's not passive, but you are on the receiving end, which is what we are most of the time as citizens. So that's this axis, and on this axis we've got what we might expect of those doing things, and what we might what we might expect for those receiving, and what kinds of duties we have when we're communicating. I'll get into this a little bit more. The reason we're doing it like this is to kind of show that if you're interested in rhetorical citizenship, you might not be interested in all of it. You might be interested in one of these corners of it. So if you're interested up here so we've got the active and we've got the rights part. That might be where notions of rhetorical agency are in focus. What kinds of expectations do citizens have in terms of the right to learn, to express themselves, to read and think critically, rights to participate, rights to have their utterances be taken into account, and etc. The right to dissent. That could be an issue you might be interested in this part of the figure. So here are some examples of individuals who in various ways would not traditionally have been seen as significant rhetors, or people with whom to whom we would look for inspiration, and they've pretty much broken that and shown that Malala became a really important voice for girls' rights. Emma Gonzalez was an activist in Florida after one of the school shootings. I think everybody recognizes Greta Thunberg. Unlikely rhetors who have really just broken conventional ideas about who speaks for us and to us. And I included a picture of a student because I think we need to start there. We need to give everyone a voice, or give them a sense that they in fact have a right to have an opinion and express it. If we're looking over here, we're still up on the active part of it, but we're looking more at what should you think about if you're being active. And deliberative norms would be one place to go. So you have a responsibility to weigh arguments and respond fairly to counter-arguments. You have to commit yourself to shared facts, accept legitimate disagreement, and be willing to adjust one's view. That's a really sensitive one, because there's something in our culture that says, stand by your view and defend it till the end. But maybe we could cultivate a sense where you say, you have a point. I had not thought of that. I'll adjust my view a little bit. We have to contribute to deliberative rather than what Simone Chambers calls plebiscitary. So that's appealing to the plebs, to the people, populist debate. And Dreisig talks about contributing to an effective deliberative system, joining competent and reflective actors on the issue. Kelly Ann Conway did not feel committed to shared facts. That would be one example. What might we expect of someone who is on the receiving side of the public discourse? So someone watching TV, reading the newspaper, strolling through X and what's happening there. Well, you might, as a consumer, as a recipient of public discourse, actually have an expectation that it's presented in a way that's reliable, that the arguments presented are true and relevant and weighty. This is something my colleague Christian Koch has worked on quite a bit, articulating norms that we might apply when evaluating public argumentation. Even if things are true, they might not be very relevant. And even if they're relevant and true, they might not be terribly weighty. So, it's a pretty high standard to hold, and I think we should work more for that. So if you're in a country where there's really not a lot of diversity in public media or a lot of diversity in terms of political choice, you are being shortchanged. Finally, what kinds of responsibilities do we have as receiving citizens? We could call that principles of accommodation. So this could include how citizens present their own political positions, but also how they regard the political positions of others. Yesterday we talked a little bit about what it means to be a good listener, what rhetorical listening might entail. And I think there is something in our time that shows that we perhaps need more education in terms of trying to be in situations that are uncomfortable because we're hearing things that we don't agree with. And one way to talk about this would say, you have a right to say this, and I'll listen. I don't need to be in agreement with you, but I also don't need to combat you because we are in a disagreement. So you might want to go to public hearings, various types of citizen forums, and you might consider how you interact on social media. What does all this mean? What are the implications? Well, we're trying to think of being a citizen as also communicative. Sure, there are other levels to it. You might think of it as a multiplicity of layers. So there are some formal, legal, economic layers that define us as citizens. But the way we talk, the way we engage in symbolic action is also a way of being a citizen. And I think we perhaps need to think as much about the process as we sometimes focus on the results. So to create conditions that would foster better conversation. And we're interested in various forms of participation. And that's kind of back to the rhetorical agency, thinking of more varied forms of public participation. There's a role for the individual here, and that's kind of where I started. There's a lot in our time that makes it very tempting to tune out of public discourse, not think about yourself as part of a society. We'd like to cultivate more of a sense of significance for the individual, and that's not a given. I think a lot of people don't really think that they have a value as individuals with their own voice. So we need to be really careful about how we react when someone raises their voice and or participates in another way than a particularly discursive one. And that's why Rosa Eberle has been a big influence for me. In this article from 2002, she says, "We need students who can themselves be and form deliberating bodies." It's a play on words, of course, because a parliament is, in English, a body. It's a political body, but she's talking about the physical body and these collectives. By studying and practicing rhetoric together in classrooms understood as proto-public spaces, that's the term she's forwarding in this article. She's saying the classroom is a kind of a microcosmos of a public sphere, and it's a good training ground. So she's saying, by practicing rhetoric together in classrooms understood as proto-public spaces, students have the potential to understand themselves, invent arguments, make judgments, and engage in conjoint actions, not merely as consumers and holders of private property, there it is again, but as creatures, neighbors, and citizens who share common interest, however ephemerally. So she's also talking in this tradition of saying there's a civic unity that we need to foster so that people think of themselves as part of something other than main character syndrome, I think it's called, where you're thinking of yourself. We've got a student here who's on a little red box giving a speech in public, and it says on the sign, a speech to youth. The idea is that various initiatives allowing young people the experience of simply speaking to others is, can feel really intimidating at first, but doing it is a way of gaining that experience of saying, well, look at me. I just had an opinion. I just shared it with someone. And that's a really important starting point. So to sum up, we did this work because we wanted to try to formulate rhetoric's significance in our time. We think we have lots of reasons for it, but if we were to articulate why should we have a rhetoric program, why are we doing this, this rhetorical citizenship was our answer to it. So we focus on citizenship as rhetorical. We think that being a citizen is rhetorical, it's discursive, and we think that there are principles and values in the rhetorical tradition that could be useful for our civic communities. So we don't think that rhetoric is prior to political action. It's not, it's not fixing the metaphors, but is itself action. And the term has gotten a little bit of traction, you might say. So the Danish Children's and Teaching Ministry has taken it up. It's written into the curriculum for high schools. It's also part of the new curriculum for primary school that rhetoric plays into that. I translated it. It says the course focuses on rhetorical citizenship understood as students' ability to participate critically, competently, and actively in a democratic society and contribute to development and change nationally as well as globally. There's a privately funded initiative in Denmark called Røst, which is an old word for voice. And it says, are you a rhetorical citizen? And this is a project that trains people in folk high schools, for instance, to give speeches. And they have speech festivals, so they get to speak in a public square. In Norway, 2022, they did a big national government-sponsored report on expression, freedom of expression, and there's a whole section on rhetorical citizenship there and how that is one of the guiding principles. There's a very new research project going on right now in the UK about dramatizing rhetorical citizenship. So it's gotten a little bit of uptake in society and also in academia. So Ida Vikørn Andersen has talked about rhetorical citizenship and the environment. Louise Anna Ladegaard had talks about lesbian YouTube videos as a tool for rhetorical citizenship. Jean Farnestock had talked about it in terms of science communication, and Irina Diana Madrana and Alexandra Gralan have talked about it in terms of podcasts, journalism podcasts, and how rhetorical citizenship helps them put a lens on the power, the giving voice to low-skilled women migrants. So that's what I had to say, and I can't even pronounce that. I just Googled it, but